Hey, good morning everybody, and welcome to Reptiles in the News. Sorry that we missed last week's episode. Of course, we were busy building the reptarium, which was absolutely incredible, but I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the story that was requested most this week and awesome to me. Of course, that was in Woodbridge, Virginia. They found a two-headed copperhead snake. That's right, in the wild. It turns out that it was only about a 3 or 4 week old animal, which makes it even more rare, and the person that came across the animal didn't want to be named in any story, so we're really not sure who actually found the animal, but they did end up contacting a guy named Perry, who was a nuisance animal removal service, and then ultimately a local herpetologist named Clover actually got involved. Now, they basically said that this was an extremely rare event because most of the two-headed snakes, which are of course a type of conjoined twin, are found in captive animals. It's extremely rare to find them in the wild, and even more rare to find one that's only 2 or 3 weeks old. As you know, two-headed snakes are delicate, and there's a good chance that this animal may not have lived if it wasn't found. As of now, they said they placed it at a Virginia viper breeder's facility, but I'm not exactly sure where that is. Clover basically said that at one point he hopes it ends up in some sort of a zoo type of situation so that it'll be on display, but for now they're trying to make sure that the animal eats and does well in captivity, of course. It was actually radiographed. It has 2 heads, of course, but only has 1 heart and 1 set of lungs, which I think is pretty typical for a lot of two-headed animals, although every now and then you will see two-headed animals that have 2 hearts and so on like that. Now, although this is an amazing story, and I love two-headed snakes, as you guys know, and two-headed animals for that matter, the thing that did kind of bother me, and I'm anxious to see what you guys think about this, is that most news sources really said like, oh, this was a nightmare scenario. If 1 head is bad enough, how about 2 heads? This is what nightmares are made of. And I kind of think it's a bummer because really this was such an amazing find and such a cool animal. For the news media to kind of come out and kind of paint it as some kind of a tragedy or some kind of a nightmare situation was kind of a little bit of a bummer to me. So regardless, the people that were involved, like Perry and Clover, really did an amazing job with this animal, and we hope that one day it will end up on display somewhere, maybe the reptarium. It would be really cool. But the fact is, the mainstream media does what the mainstream media does and try to paint reptiles in a bad light. Regardless, a lot of people saw this, and I'd like to know from you guys how you felt about this story. This next story is about an extremely old alligator named Yuja at the Belgrade Zoo. Believe it or not, it was actually delivered to the zoo on August of 1937. That's right, on the eve of World War II. Think about that. It has been in captivity since 1937. Yuja actually was 2 years old when he got to the zoo, so just think about how old that is. It's actually 81 or maybe even 82 years at this point in captivity as the oldest alligator to actually live. In 2012, it actually got some gangrene on his right claw, had to have that amputated. Other than that, the animal seems to be completely healthy. They say that he's actually a little more lethargic. You can imagine at 80-something years of age, it probably is. But apparently during feeding time, it's just as enthusiastic as it's ever been, with the exception of every now and then it misses its food, maybe from bad eyesight, or I don't know what it is. Regardless, I hope that my alligator RJ lives 80-something years. That would be absolutely incredible. So if you're ever in the Belgrade Zoo area, you got to go check out this alligator because it's pretty awesome. In this next story, you can imagine you're in Malaysia, the weather is great, you're on the beach, you're kind of enjoying your day, and then this happens.
Lari kait kian.
That's right, I think most non-reptile people that see a crocodile on the beach would probably try to get away, but not in this case. Henry, the 23-year-old man, decided to pull out his video camera and actually videotape, and most people would say get a little bit too close. Now, I will sympathize with Henry here because if I was in his position, I'd probably do the same type of thing. But with that said, it's probably much better to err on the side of caution and not get too close to a wild animal like a big crocodile that's 10 foot long. Apparently, the locals have said that they've been seeing this crocodile on the beach for several weeks, but they thought it was a monitor lizard. In actuality, it turned out to be a crocodile. Now, this is a pretty rare sighting to see a crocodile on the beach, but we all know that saltwater crocodiles, even Nile crocodiles, will sometimes swim in the ocean. There's a place in South Africa, in St. Lucia, where actually crocodiles will not only go into the river estuaries, but also onto the beaches and into the water, so it's pretty interesting. I actually went to the beach hoping to see some crocodiles. We didn't see anything, but nevertheless, apparently there are times where people are body surfing boating and literally will see a crocodile right next to him. I think it's pretty awesome. I'd like to know from you guys, if you went to a beach, would you like to see a crocodile? Would this be something that you would film, or do you think that Henry was a little overzealous? This next story actually has a couple things going on with it. Number one, a little bit of harassment of endangered animals, also kind of being not so smart and posting it on social media. Turns out there was an Alabama man vacationing in Kauai, and he actually posted on his social media him petting a monk seal while he was snorkeling. Now, he even hashtagged it on Instagram. Of course, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, actually saw the hashtag monk seal. They saw that he was actually petting the animal, which by the way is a crime, and they actually fined him $1,500. Now again, if you post on social media, you're kind of setting yourself up for this type of thing. They basically just used his profile, found his home address, contacted him and said, guess what? You are getting a fine for doing this monk seal. And even furthermore, while they were looking at his social media, he happened to be aggressively going after a sea turtle trying to get a selfie up close. Now, sea turtles are under the Endangered Species Act, and you can only get within 10 feet of them before you're breaking the law. When it comes to the monk seals, you have to have a 50-foot berth or you can get in trouble. This particular person did say that they would pay the fine, they weren't going to fight it. This just goes to show you shouldn't be messing with endangered animals. You have to know which animals you can potentially touch and which animals you have to let go. And then certainly the worst thing you do when you break any crime is post it on social media. So it ended up costing this guy $1,500. He paid it, all is good, but hopefully some other people learned a valuable lesson. And as with every week, I always like to take a break and just share with some stuff that I thought was amazing on the interwebs when it comes to animals. This first one is pretty darn neat. It's actually Ed Valerdo from CMC Reptiles. And this is a super leopard lesser cinnamon, but it's not just a normal one. I mean, the pied look to it is absolutely amazing. So good job, Ed. This next one is pretty darn cool. It's actually a pied rough earth snake from Corey Rolke. I tell you what, I've never even seen anything like this. I mean, little rough earth snakes are so small and so cute. To have a piebald one like this is pretty amazing, but I actually think it's more of a kind of that licorice stick or white-sided mutation than it would actually be a pied, but that's all semantics. The fact is, it's pretty darn awesome. This next one is an absolute stunner. It's from CS Pythons. It's actually an ivory Burmese python. Now, the ivory Burmese pythons are actually the super version of a fire, but what's interesting with the ivories is that they're not all white. They sometimes have some yellow, and this particular animal has some incredible amounts of yellow in its head and on its back, making the animal just look absolutely breathtaking. And then lastly, I wanted to share this pied Burmese python. What an amazing animal. This is actually from Eduardo Fetti. Now, my understanding is there's no pied Burmese in the country, and because of the Lasiac situation, you really can't ship them into the country, so there's like scaleless Burmese pythons, pied Burmese pythons, and a few other mutations that are overseas, but we can't get them here in the US, which is a bummer because I think a big 18-foot pied Burmese python would be absolutely incredible. Who knows, one day someone might pop one out and I could own one, but what an amazing animal. And like with most weeks, we like to at least have one story of something really awesome found. After 54 years, there was actually a species of frog that was rediscovered in Zimbabwe. Turns out that these cave squeakers were thought to be extinct after 1962, but a recent expedition that was led up by a researcher named Hopkins found some of these dark dollar-sized frogs. Now, obviously they're called cave squeakers because they have a high-pitched squeak, and it turns out that his research group was also led up by a researcher from Cape Town that had actually found similar frogs in the South Africa region. Now, when they heard the squeak of this frog, he knew that it was an interesting species, and they were able to actually track the animal down. Now, in 1962, when the animal was originally discovered, it was discovered in a cave in a wet area. Turns out that researchers have been looking for this animal for over 50 years and haven't been able to find it again. Well, Hopkins and his researchers actually found him far away from water. And with this species of frog, believe it or not, they don't seem to be dependent on water whatsoever. And like a lot of species of frogs, they don't hatch out into tadpoles where they need water. They actually hatch right into little small frogs. Now, it turns out that Hopkins says that this species seems to be pretty good where they found it in Zimbabwe, and there happens to be a pretty viable population. With that said, much like most of the animals that are in peril around the country, there's illegal mining in the area that is causing not only potential problems for this particular species of frog, but all wildlife in the area. Hopkins and his researchers have actually been able to acquire a bunch of these animals, set up breeding groups, and he feels pretty strongly about the future of this particular species. He has some females that have nested, laid eggs, and hopefully soon will hatch some of these babies. So not only will the captive population hopefully do well, but hopefully in the wild there'll be other pockets that are not being devastated by this illegal mining, or they'll have to find some kind of a solution to it. Regardless, I always like to end on a positive note, and I think it's amazing that the cave squeakers are back around, even though they had disappeared disappeared for 54 years. And with that said, I'd like to leave it to you guys. What story did you appreciate the most? What story would you like me to cover in the future? What is going on? And tell me how you enjoyed Reptiles in the News this week. And until next week, make sure to be kind to someone. This has been Reptiles in the News.